Hello everybody. How you all doing out there? I hope this video is finding you well. Welcome or welcome back to Get Right On In. My name is Andrew, for those of you who do not know, and today I am just going to go over my little book to movie comparison for The Never-Ending Story. I, like so many of you out there probably, loved this movie as a child, and it has also carried over into one of my favorites as an adult. Back in college when I worked at Borders, I found a copy of this book for the first time, and up until then I didn't even know that it was a book. The first time I read through this, I thought that they did a really good job following along with the plot in the movie, but now that I've gotten into a little more analysis, I have some thoughts. I'm not gonna waste too much more time here on the introduction, so without further ado, let's just get right on in. A couple of quick immediate changes from the book to the movie that I'm just gonna start off with is that in the book, the world is called Fantastica, and in the movie, it is called Fantasia. So for the duration of this video, I will be referring to it as Fantastica, as that is the name in the book. Also, the character of Bastien in the book is described as being a fat boy of 10 or 12, which, first of all, Mr. End, Michael End is the author of this, but Mr. End, I would just like for you to know, even though, rest your soul because you have passed from this world, that 10 and 12 are two very different ages, and I don't know what happened to 11, but if he is 10 or 12, that's just strange to me, I don't know. But in the movie, the Bastien is obviously a lot more aesthetically pleasing to look at because, I don't know, that was just the casting choice that they made. But as soon as I found out that the author was very upset with the movie version of the book, I started with that. You know what I mean? Like just that big difference between the book Bastien and the movie Bastien. Because in actuality, honestly, Bastien's looks are a huge part of this book. I stated before that I thought that the movie did a really good job following along with the plot points of the book, at least for the first half. The movie is only the first half of the book, just to put that out there if you don't know. And I will be having a little bit of spoilers, I guess, from the portions of the book that are in the movie, but I'm not really gonna have anything for the later half of the book, so if you haven't read this and you still want to at the end, the second half is still gonna be a completely new story for you. But if you have seen the movie, then the first half is really pretty much just the same as far as plot. But while they might have done well following the plot line, I think that ultimately what they did that upset the author was totally did a disservice to all of the characters. So here's the thing. This book is heavily dependent on the relationship between Bastien and Atreyu. In the movie, yes, we see that. Bastien is following along with Atreyu's journey, turning the page as he's going, and he slowly starts to become more and more connected with the world of Fantastica. But in the book, Bastien is attracted to the things in Atreyu that he does not see in himself. Someone good looking, heroic, and sent out on an epic quest. But underneath that, more importantly, Bastien connects to Atreyu's feelings of fear and self-wondering when it comes to the task at hand. They both go through this huge transition of just feeling like whatever task is handed to them is bigger than what they are capable of doing. So ultimately here in the book, Atreyu is a representation of a character-driven novel. We do see that a little bit in the movie as well, how he is tasked with leading the Earthling child over into Fantastica, but a lot of that inner connection is really missing. The movie also begins with Bastien just being weird to be weird, I guess, and then having that relationship with a very distant father, which does happen in the book, but Bastien is a lot more understanding of why his father is being so distant toward him in the wake of his mother's death. He spends a lot of time in the book reflecting on the good relationship that they used to have and how nowadays he just simply wishes that his father would talk to him. And I understand that there was only so much space for that in the movie. It's not how the book starts, but I can understand why that would be why they would start the movie that way. But in the movie, his father just comes off too cold and let's just be a man about things, and that's just not how it was at all in the book. It doesn't examine the real issue at hand, which, however, I also actually think has a lot to do with the target audience of the movie. Obviously, the movie is way more geared toward children, so it wouldn't have really made sense to delve into some of those intricacies as far as father-son relationships goes like that. Especially because, honestly, with how closely they did follow along with the plot of the book, a simple, like, 30 minutes more in the movie would have really rounded out a lot. But see, in the book, although the main character of Bastien is 10 or 12, the book itself is written and geared toward an audience more along the 18 to 35 range, because it is meant to be a reminder of the importance of your imagination even as you grow older. That theme is obviously definitely examined in the film, but it certainly does not have the same punch that it delivers in the book. A punch which may have been better delivered if the movie was geared toward an older audience. In defense of the movie though, I'm not actually all the way sure that the movie would have worked if they would have done that, especially considering the early 80s time frame that we're talking about here for this. And I also think that if any attempts were made to remake this in the present day, it would probably run into the same issue where it would just be very CGI heavy, and they would just spend so much time trying to make it look cool that they would not delve deeper into the characterization, which I do believe is what the author was so upset about. The one thing that I can really accept the most out of the lack of characterization in the movie was the lack of character names outside of Bastien and Atreyu. Just in case anybody out there is wondering, that rockbiter's name is Pion Crackzock. And thank the Lord for the audiobook, because I would not have known how to say that word without it. Pion Crackzock. That's how it says it in the audiobook, so Pion Crackzock. It is. But outside of not naming those characters, with Bastien's character in particular, they really missed out on the opportunity to delve into the idea that Bastien is a representation of the epitome of imagination. In this book, as he's reading this book, he has these revelations of these being the types of stories that he really likes to read, because these are the types of stories that he really likes to tell. His last name is also Books in the book, B-U-X, and that's never mentioned in the movie, which is a side thing, but I also thought it was kind of cool that he loved books and his last name was Books and whatever. Everything in here is about Bastien being a storyteller and the importance of his mind creating whatever he wanted. We do see in the movie that Bastien is granted some wishes from the childlike empress after he names her, which I still don't really like the name Moonchild, because I feel like it sounds very similar to the childlike empress, but it was the same in both book and movie, so whatever. In the book, minor tiny spoilers, is the second half of the book is Bastien's wishes, whereas in the movie, Bastien's wishes is when it ends, and then it says like, this is the start of a story for another time, or whatever the last quote in the movie is. The book delves more into the importance of Bastien's wishes preventing Fantastica from falling into the nothing, and it ties back to one of the first thoughts that is examined in this book by Bastien, which is him wondering what happens between the covers of a book while it is closed. If the book never gets opened, nothing ever happens. Because even though the ink in the story still exists within the pages, if it never gets opened, nothing really ever happens in a sense. It remains hollow and dark because it takes the imagination to bring it to life. Side note as well, the physical book here is multicolored. We've got the green text here for the Bastien / Earth world, and we have the maroon text there for Atreyu / Fantastica. And at the beginning of every chapter, there is also the green and maroon drawings that is supposed to depict that connection between Bastien and Atreyu throughout the text. In this book, the book that Bastien is reading of the Never-Ending Story is also multicolored, but it never talks about what color belongs to where. And my personal opinion would be that the green text in this book is meant to represent us as the reader looking into Bastien, looking into Atreyu. But back to the importance of Bastien's imagination. The character of Bastien would make an argument that these types of fantastical creatures are necessary because they don't talk about the dull hubbub of life and goes over the need of these types of fictional stories that really don't exist so that the reader can feel some sort of exhilaration and attached to the idea that they feel like the hero of the story. In a lot of ways, Atreyu is obviously that hero of the story, but in the book, Bastien is actually the anti-hero. Some of that I really cannot talk too much about without delving into the second half of this book. But there is always a yin and yang balance between Atreyu and Bastien throughout the entire text. And sincerely, that connection between them is very much lacking in the movie. Even the names show the juxtaposition of the characters in the book. Atreyu's name means son of all, where Bastien as the character feels like he is nobody's son because of his now distant relationship with his father and the loss of his mother. And within the physical description of the book, Atreyu himself is never really described, but it is inferred that he's good looking and strong. And even with like the Great Buffalo history that he has a very Native American-esque heritage to him, which ties back even further to the Bastien in this book reading the book sitting Indian style, which nowadays would not be a very politically correct term to use. Back in the 70s in Germany, they obviously didn't care as much, but it was, I believe, used as a genuine way to establish that further connection between the characters. Whereas in the movie, whenever Bastien hears or reads Atreyu's name, he just looks at the sticker on his backpack of a Native American slaying a buffalo, and he's also laying like face down. The snakes on Orin in the movie are the closest representation to the yin and yang balance between Bastien and Atreyu. One of the more pivotal times that this characterization goes missing in the movie is at the Mirror Gate. So the Mirror Gate in both book and movie is when Atreyu sees Bastien in the mirror. In the book, however, it's only the second of 3 gates, but the third gate is this like all-knowing being named Uyulala, and I can 100% understand why they didn't put that in the movie. So in the book, when Atreyu first looks at Bastien, we get the first sense of jealousy from Bastien to Atreyu. Bastien does not like the way that he looks compared to Atreyu. He feels inferior to him, and he wishes that he could only be half as good as Atreyu. It isn't as much about the impossibility of crossing over from this world into that world like it is in the movie, as much as it is about Bastien himself not feeling worthy himself as a character and as a person to go forth with the task being handed to him. We also miss out on a whole section from the book where Bastien is in the attic and he thinks that he's hearing all of these ghosts and all of these things moving around, and as he's reading, Atreyu is going through like a ghostly procession. It's when he loses the Orin medal, and in the movie that's like half a second, but in the book that is Atreyu's most pivotal moment of vulnerability, and that vulnerability is what speaks to Bastien the most. Bastien makes the decision to stick along the journey as the reader. Even though he's getting hungry, even though he's cold, even though he's scared, he is very into the story because of the connection between him and Atreyu. He feels like Atreyu needs him, so he stays. The more Atreyu realizes his own need for the childlike empress, the more he influences Bastien to stick around and do whatever he can to help. The meeting between Atreyu and Gamork is also very, very different in this book. For one, there is a whole thing about how the characters of Fantastica can leave the book to come into Earth, but would never be able to return. And if they came to Earth, they would be considered a lie because they are essentially made up. There's this whole conversation about manipulators, which is basically just writers, and the necessity of Atreyu staying in Fantastica basically as a character. The conversation between Gamorreek and Atreyu is kind of similar in the movie, but it's a lot more about hope than it is about lies and manipulation, and in that hope it's a lot more about just destroying hope in general. They are very, very different themes examined, and just another reason that I can understand why the author might have been upset with some of the depictions of the movie. I also think Atreyu's character got a lot of disservice in this film. He goes through a whole identity crisis of feeling like a nobody who is being taken over by the nothing. It is a very relatable section of the book that could have been in the movie, especially for those who suffer from those kinds of feelings on a regular day-to-day basis. This also ties back to my earlier mention of Atreyu basically representing a character-driven novel, because relatability and escapism and all of that is something that a lot of readers look to when they're choosing their next book, especially those readers who love fantasy. All of the stuff as well with the childlike Empress and Atreyu and Bastien crossing over into the world is very, very different in the book. This is a pivotal point in the book here. The necessity of imagination. The importance of identifying with the main character. The reason that Atreyu had to go through this whole entire mess in the first place just to connect with Bastien and lead him here. So I can understand a little bit about why the author would have been upset with some of the things that they did. Especially with the necessity of the reader or whoever voluntarily choosing to come to Fantastica. As in, like, no one's forced to read this book, you know? There's also nothing at all about Bastien's lack of feeling like he as himself is good enough as a person to deal with the task that is handed to him, because he just thinks that he's fat and ugly and worthless. But all of that isn't even examined, and it's really, really important, I think. That connection between the reader and the main character is so vital, and I just, like, they totally screwed up the character of Bastien, whatever. I also feel like the naming of the childlike Empress wasn't even really as important in the movie as it was in the book. The thing is, names are identity, a vibration assigned to the human attached to them. Lacking a name, lacking an identity, lacking a vibration is thus lacking an existence, rendering her a nothing. In the movie, yes, fine. It's still Bastien that has to name her, but the more I look into all of this, the more I just really understand why the author was not happy with the end result of the movie. There are a few other things, I just don't want to make this a 4-day video over here. But overall, I honestly just was not expecting to be as upset with the movie by the end of this. Because like I said, when I first read this, I was like, wow, the movie did a really good job following along with the plot. The plot. Not enough just to follow the plot. You need the characters. Character driven, over plot driven, any day. If you are interested in reading this book, just also be aware that there is a whole other series out there that I have just found out about. Apparently, this book was very popular in Germany, obviously where it was written, but also in Japan. So basically every other Neverending Story book is in Japanese and German. I don't know if there's any other English translations out there, so I will figure it out and see. Because there's definitely a lot of places in this book that there is the mention of that is another story for another time, which is also, I believe, the last quote of the movie, because they were trying to tie that back into the book. But I just recommend this book so hard, especially if you like the movie, and I still like the movie. It's not like I'm never gonna watch the movie again. There's always this kind of like differences between the book and the movie, and 99.9% of the times the book is always better. But I mostly just wanted to do this because I feel like so many people don't even know this is a book in the first place, because the English translation of this book I think came out the same year that the movie did, so the movie just way overshadowed everything. But I think that that is gonna be it for this little analysis as far as the main differences go, and I just am very upset about the lack of characterization. And also, if you're still here, this is way the end of the video, but I just wanted to say that the part with Artax is so much worse in the book because Artax can talk and he's literally like talking to Atreyu as he's dying. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing. So that's why I saved it here for the end, so that people who might have dropped off already don't need to know how much worse the Artax scene is in the book. It's just so, oh, it's so bad. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, I would love it if you would consider pressing that little like button, as well as maybe pressing on that little subscribe button as well, and joining me for bookish and writerly and entertainment-y-esque content every Tuesday and Thursday and sometimes on Sunday. In the meantime, I hope you all have a day just as beautiful as you, and I will see you next time. Bye.